Welcome to the Woolberg-Michelson Show, where we talk about the future of work and best hiring practices. In this episode, we're talking about internal mobility or talent mobility, which is one employee moving either to a higher position or to another role within their organization. There are 4 types of internal mobility. First is vertical, which means moving to a higher position. And then there's a lateral movement, which means moving to another role. And then you have interdepartmental position, which is moving to another role within your department. And lastly, you have location change, which is moving to another location within your organization. On this episode, we have our VP, Jessica Hunt-West, and also one of our program managers, Marissa DeVille. Let's hear what they have to say about internal mobility in the workplace.
Yeah, so this is actually my first recruiting position. I had done a lot of customer service prior to WM, and then also I worked for the school newspaper at my university campus, and so I recruited new members to the paper, and then also new companies to our ad trades. But within WM, I started off as a recruiting assistant, and then I ended up getting promoted to a program specialist, which is another recruiting role here at WM. And then after working as a program specialist, I got promoted to a recruiter, which is just the first title of recruiting that you first get into as you're moving up the ladder. And then in that role, I started taking on more I would say kind of like supervisor, managerial duties in that role. I started learning more about the program itself rather than just the requests and filling those requests, and kind of more of the structure within the my program. So from that point, I wanted to have a little bit more of a hand in the program itself. And so I found myself getting a little bit frustrated because I was on the recruiting side and I didn't have that hand in, how the program was working. And my manager at the time was, she was like, "Oh, well, I didn't know that you wanted to take on more of those types of responsibilities. You can definitely start taking on some more of those responsibilities and kind of offloading those a little bit." So that was when kind of that conversation got opened up. The program manager seat on my program was open, and so the company was looking outside to fill this role. And then they were like, well, Marissa is interested in, taking on some of these responsibilities. So, let's turn the conversation out this way. And so I ended up chatting with my manager more about it. And she was like, look, if you want to take this on, I would rather you take this on, since you know a lot about the program. You are, in the program day in and day out. You know more than somebody that we'd have to train in if we were to have them fill that role. So if it's something that you want, it's something that I can work with you with. And I will say that was a little bit intimidating because it sounds like a lot. You're like, I've never been a manager. I don't know what all that entails. What will I have to be taken care of? What am I going to have to learn? What are going to be those curves? And in that moment, I really kind of voiced those things, and I think that's what was important. Was that I wasn't just like, yeah, I can take it on. I'm gonna just sit and get the spot and figure it out. I did voice those concerns. I did say that, I was nervous on taking on all these responsibilities. And she really broke it down for me. She said, I'm gonna be here with you. I'm gonna be training you. I'm gonna be here. If you have any obstacles, that's my role. And so that really kind of helped me step into that role more confidently. And when I had issues, she was there to sidebar me, and then I could jump back in and be confident and really do my role and really kind of build up the program. And I think that's ultimately kind of what led me to the program manager position I am in today.
What advice would you give to someone who wants to take on more responsibility? What is the first step that they should do once they realize?
I think just bringing up the conversation that you'd like to take on more, you'd like to learn more, and you're open to those things, because people don't know unless you voice that. And just kind of asking about how things work, and don't really, be that, person that sits on the bench. Really kind of ask those questions so that you start opening up that conversation.
A lot of times there's an argument against internal mobility that it's too disruptive, or a lot of things will get lost in translation. So as the VP, I want you to describe your response to employers if they were to say, internal mobility is just not an option for us, it's too disruptive, it's too costly. What would be your response?
So I think that when management is looking at evaluating, the opportunity for upward mobility within their organization, they have to consider two things. A lot of times, if they're not necessarily wanting someone to move out of a role into another role, it's usually because that person is so pertinent to the role that they're in. So you have to ask yourself and evaluate your team, evaluate your organization. Do you have places or people in place that can cross-train to be able to support the duties within an organization so that someone does have the opportunity to move up, have that upward mobility, constantly learning. So that means the person in that role is teaching someone else, who's teaching someone else, who's teaching someone else. So you always have to have someone in place that's learning the different and various tasks within an organization. And that upward mobility that you creates value for your team. And so it's a very necessary thing to have within your organization. The other thing is that when those individuals have that opportunity, they're going to move into the roles and fulfill those roles a lot easier because they already understand the inner workings of the organization. So there's some of those smaller details that you don't necessarily have to go into or spend time on training because the employee is going to understand that already after having already worked in other roles within the organization.
Cross-training. Is that a strategy that we do at WM?
Absolutely. So cross-training is really, really important. Being able to have recruiters having the ability to take on and understand how to operate a program so that one day they're able to move into the role of an associate program manager or program manager taking on those responsibilities. That's a gradually learned process. And so even as Marissa was describing, being able to take on those additional responsibilities is what's allowing for that upward mobility. You also, within WM, kind of touch a lot of different areas within the company in one role. So one role, for example, as a recruiter, you're going to touch a little bit of compliance, you're going to touch a little bit of accounting and payroll. So you have an opportunity to get exposure to a lot of different departments, which allows for that vertical movement if you're interested in those types of roles.
What are some of the human resources benefits of internal hiring?
So definitely, as I mentioned, just being able to have someone in the role who already understands the inner workings of the company. There's no additional cost as it relates to benefits. Those things are already being given to an employee. So there's a lot of reasons why, but the biggest reason is just the morale within your team. When you're adding value and the ability for your team to grow, your team is happy. And happy employees make for a happy company. I will say though, in most cases, I think Marissa, your case is unique in that you have that background and experience, right? But for someone who's coming maybe into the role that doesn't have that bridging and that gapping comes from the exposure. So exposure is key. As you're involved in the conversations, you may start out just listening in, getting the exposure to be able to see what that conversation and dialogue looks like between the program manager or VP in that regard and the client partner, right? So it's the same thing with any role that you're working within. Getting the exposure to see what that role is really looking like in the day-to-day, how it's performed is the first step. And then that exposure, you start to adapt and learn key factors in that role.
That leads perfectly into one of the other questions where describe what management should do when an employee wants to advance, shift roles, or move up, but you notice as a manager, you notice a knowledge or a skills gap.
Yeah. So I think it's very important. Transparency is key. We have to be able to have a real conversation with our team members about what their strengths are and areas that they can improve or build. As a leader, you're constantly growing. That never changes. So that's always something that every one of us can be working on to just grow as an individual, as a professional, and as a leader. So transparency is key, being able to talk about it. But the other thing in that transparency is having some specific examples. So when I'm working with my team, if I'm saying to them, hey, I would like for you to improve your attention to detail, I want to give examples of conversations or emails or communications that may have come across my desk where I felt there lacked that attention to detail. So just having those specific examples is key to illustrate and give specific accounts to associates so they can see what it is that you're really describing, and that really helps them hone in on improving those areas. I think the third thing that I would say is doing it real time is also real important. So when at all possible, giving the feedback in the moment, that's when it's going to be fresh in your mind, it's fresh in the associate's mind, and so the understanding of the situation, how to improve or do something different is going to be very much more clairvoyant to them.
Are you feeling stuck at your job or unsatisfied in your career? Consider connecting with some career experts at Wilbur Michelson Recruiting. We are a staffing agency dedicated to connecting top employers with top job seekers. We've placed over 100,000 job seekers in admin, clerical, administrative roles, as well as others. Visit our website at www.wmjobs.com.